Live with chapter 17 of Great Expectations. And, at the end of the last chapter, chapter 16, there was a tonal change with Pip's sister, Mrs. Jo Gargery, being the victim of a violent attack. So it'll be interesting to see now what happens as we push on. But let's not waste any more time and let's push on. I now fell into a regular routine of apprenticeship life, which was varied beyond the limits of the village and the marshes. By no more remarkable circumstances than the arrival of my birthday am I paying another visit to Miss Havisham. I'll just write the whole paragraph and then read it out. I now fell into a regular routine of apprenticeship life, which was varied beyond the limits of the village and the marshes by no more remarkable circumstances than the arrival of my birthday and my paying another visit to Miss Havisham. I found Miss Sarah Pocket still on duty at the gate. I found Miss Havisham just as I had left her. And she spoke of Estella in the very same way, if not in the very same words. The interview lasted but a few minutes, and she gave me a guinea when I was going, and told me to come again on my next birthday. I may mention at once that this became an annual custom. I tried to decline taking the guinea on the first occasion, but with no better effect than causing her to ask me angrily if I expected more. Then and after that, I took it. So this paragraph is excellent for two reasons. One is we've talked, if you've watched some of the previous videos, but I understand that they're very long, so maybe just the summaries. We've talked about the French semiotician Roland Barthes and the idea of enigmas and resolutions, and the middle of a story is both the simultaneous delay and arrival at the resolution. So here we see, I think, something very classic. You see it in fairy tales. Fairy tales are very good at this. What happens in a fairy tale? You don't get something the first time, right? Usually it's 3 times. You have to ask 3 times. And then on the 3rd time, something happens. So here Pip is going back repeatedly, but he's encountering delays to the enigma of what will happen with him and Estella. So this sort of approach and being rebuffed is very like a fairy tale. It's a very classic structure. And then the other thing is that this is summary with a scene in it. So that the scene, which is embedded very quickly, is Miss Havisham getting angry when Pip tries to decline the guinea, right? The £1. So that's embedded into a summary that's actually summarizing a speeding up time and summarizing several years of time. So that's why this is an excellent opening paragraph for those two reasons. So unchanging was the dull old house, the yellow light in the darkened room, the faded spectre in the chair by the dressing table glass, that I felt as if the stopping of the clocks had stopped time in that mysterious place, and while I and everything else outside it grew older, it stood still. Daylight never entered the house as to my thoughts and remembrances of it, any more than as to the actual fact. It bewildered me, and under its influence, I continued at heart to hate my trade and to be ashamed of home. So Pip is effectively in a holding pattern while Estella is traveling abroad and bettering herself. Imperceptibly, I became conscious of a change in Biddy, however. Her shoes came up at the heel. Her hair grew bright and neat. Her hands were always clean. She was not beautiful. She was common and could not be like Estella. But she was pleasant and wholesome and sweet-tempered. So we have like a sort of a Betty and Veronica setup here, where, Biddy is from the same social strata as Pip, and he's very, very quick to say she's not beautiful. And we know one thing, that Estella was, the first ever description of her was she's pretty, and Dickens has tagged Estella with two words, pretty and scornful. And here we get Biddy, who is not beautiful, but clearly not scornful. So we've got a love triangle brewing. But characterization through contrast is one of the most ancient tools we have in storytelling. She had not been with us more than a year. I just slouch without even realizing it. I just sink into my chair. I remember her being newly out of mourning at the time it struck me. When I observed to myself one evening that she had curiously thoughtful and attentive eyes that were very pretty and very good. So her eyes stand out. And, I think it's interesting, as writers, we shouldn't try and to try and copy films. We shouldn't try and give people a full visual portrait. We've just got here from Biddy her hands and her eyes and her temperament. And we are allowed to create our own mental picture of Biddy. It came of my lifting up my own eyes from a task I was poring at, writing some passages from a book to improve myself in two ways at once by a sort of stratagem. It's so funny because guess what, Pip? I'm doing exactly that. I am writing some passages from a book to improve myself. What is my stratagem? I'm not sure. It's different from Pip's, I assure you. But there is a stratagem at work. And seeing Biddy, observant of what I was about, I laid down my pen, and Biddy stopped in her needlework without laying it down. Biddy, said I, how do you manage it? Either I am very stupid, or you are very clever. What is it that I manage? I don't know. Returned Biddy. She managed our whole domestic life, and wonderfully too. But I did not mean that, though that made what I did mean more surprising. How do you manage, Biddy, said I, to learn everything that I learn and always to keep up with me? I was beginning to be rather vain of my knowledge, although it's a wonderful quality in Pip that I think when you have a character who's likable, they also need to continue to be likable, and giving them new likable qualities over time is sound. So, on top of his levity and his self-deprecating humor, I think his thirst for knowledge is a very likable quality in Pip. For I spent my birthday guineas on it and set aside the greater part of my pocket money for similar investment. Though I have no doubt now that the little I knew was extremely dear at the price. I might as well ask you, said Biddy, how you manage. No, because when I come in from the forge of a night, anyone can see me turning to at it. But you never turn to at it, Biddy. I suppose I must catch it like a cough, said Biddy quietly. Obviously going to boarding school, I saw this people who seemed to know everything, and I was like, when did you study? Like, I didn't see you studying, but clearly some people have an excellent absorption, and I've always wished I had that ability. And went on with her sewing, pursuing my idea as I leaned back in my wooden chair and looked at Biddy. Is it sewing away or sewing away? I don't know why I'm tripping over this. Away with her head on one side, I began to think her rather an extraordinary girl. for I called to mind now that she was equally accomplished in the terms of our trade and the names of our different sorts of work and our various tools. In short, whatever I knew, Biddy knew. Theoretically, she was already as good a blacksmith as I, or better. You are one of those, Biddy, said I, who make the most of every chance. You never had a chance before you came here, and see how improved you are. Biddy looked at me for an instant and went on with her sewing. I was your first teacher, though, wasn't I? Said she, as she sewed. Biddy, I exclaimed, in amazement. Why, you are crying. No, I am not, said Biddy, looking up and laughing. What put that in your head? What could have put it in my head but the glistening of a tear as it dropped on her work? I sat silent, recalling what a drudge she had been until Mr. Wopsle's great aunt successfully overcame the bad habit of living, that's quite rude, Pip, so highly desirable to be got rid of by people. So he softened the insult a bit by generalizing it. I recalled the hopeless circumstances by which she had been surrounded in the miserable little shop and the miserable little noisy evening school with that miserable old bundle of incompetence, always to be dragged and shouldered. So the triple miserable really does a lot of work. I reflected that even in those untoward times, there must have been latent in Biddy what was now developing. For in my first uneasiness and discontent, I had turned to her for help. As a matter of course, Biddy sat quietly sewing, shedding no more tears, and while I looked at her and thought about it all, it occurred to me that perhaps I had not been sufficiently grateful to Biddy. I might have been too reserved and should have patronized her more. Though I did not use that precise word in my meditations with my confidence. So it's interesting, this sort of reflection on this dialogue. You know, I don't feel the same spark between Pip and Biddy as we feel between Pip and Estella, even though Estella is scornful and disdainful and slaps Pip. They are electric together. Whereas, you know, Biddy it's just the flirtation isn't as electric. Yes, Biddy. I mean, she's literally sort of, instead of the girl next door, she's literally the girl at home, you know. Yes, Biddy, I observed, when I had done turning it over. You were my first teacher. And that at a time when we little thought of ever being together like this in this kitchen. Ah, poor thing, replied Biddy. It was like her self-forgetfulness to transfer the remark to my sister and to get up and be busy about her, making her more comfortable. That's sadly true. So she is quite classy, Biddy, redirecting the compliment because it is unfortunate circumstances that have brought them together. Well, said I, we must talk together a little more, as we used to do, and I must consult you a little more, as I used to do. Let us... What's he gonna say? Oh, he's gonna ask her on a date. Let us have a quiet walk on the marshes next Sunday, Biddy, and a long chat. Look at that, Pip. My sister was never left alone now, but Joe more than readily undertook the care of her on that Sunday afternoon, and Biddy and I went out together. Yet another check in the Joe as best man in the world column. He's just such a solid guy. I mean, he's come out the hero of the first 17 chapters, and I like Pip. It was summertime and lovely weather when we had passed the village and the church and the churchyard and were out on the marshes and began to see the sails of the ships as they sailed on. I began to combine Miss Havisham and Estella with the prospect in my usual way. When we came to the riverside and sat down on the bank with the water rippling at our feet. I mean, pre-industrial or around the Industrial Revolution, it must have been quite beautiful, but maybe I'm just romanticizing England, making it all more quiet than it would have been without that sound. I resolved that it was a good time and place for the admission of Biddy into my inner confidence. Biddy, said I, after binding her to secrecy, I want to be a gentleman. And so he says the quiet part out loud. He wants to, he yearns to escape his class circumstances and be the equal to Estella. Now, what is she going to say? Oh, I wouldn't if I was you, she returned. I don't think it would answer. So an interesting response, not quite saying it's impossible, but the second I don't think it would answer is sort of like, it won't suit you, or it may not go the way you want it, which is a soft way of maybe saying it's not going to work out for you. Biddy, said I, with some severity, I have particular reasons for wanting to be a gentleman. So now we can see that he is going to confess to someone who clearly has a crush on him that he has a crush on Estella, which is a classic teenage boy mistake. You know best, Pip, echoing Joe. But don't you think you are happier as you are? Biddy, I exclaimed. Biddy, have you not read the title of the novel? Impatiently. I am not at all happy as I am. I am disgusted with my calling. That's a strong word. And with my life. I have never taken to either since I was bound. Don't be absurd. Was I absurd? Said Biddy, quietly raising her eyebrows. I am sorry for that. I didn't mean to be. I only want you to do well and to be comfortable. Well, then, understand once for all that I never shall or can be comfortable, or anything but miserable. There, Biddy. Unless I can lead a very different sort of life from the life I lead now. That's a pity. Said Biddy, shaking her head with a sorrowful air. So he states his yearning out very explicitly. Now, I too had so often thought it a pity that, in the singular kind of quarrel with myself, which I was always carrying on, I was half inclined to shed tears of vexation and distress when Biddy gave utterance to her sentiment and my own. This is the second time, sort of, that Pip has done this. Earlier as well, there was a moment where Joe confirmed what Pip was thinking, and it was agonizing for him. And I think, we're 17 chapters in. We can start analyzing why Great Expectations is such a great novel. And I think that Pip is very self-aware and does a lot of honest self-inventory and self-examination. And he's aware of the psychological battles within him. And I think in that sense, we're talking about the 19th century, the novel, the great psychological novels, people think of Dostoevsky. But for me, to do this in a Bildungsroman, coming of age with a young narrator, to do psychological complexity, to do romance, Dickens really could do it all. So he did this sort of literary depth in a Hollywood blockbuster of its time format. So I've always liked authors who can be both popular and literary. And I think perhaps that's one of the reasons I was drawn to this book. But I'm seeing that now, because the singular kind of quarrel with myself, which I was always carrying on, that's an inner psychological battle. I told her she was right, and I knew it was much to be regretted. But still it was not to be helped. If I could have settled down, I said to Biddy, plucking up the short grass within reach. This is interesting because we're quite far into this dialogue, and it's one of the first sort of details from the world. I feel sometimes myself and others are guilty of sort of excessive dialogue tagging, and I wonder if that is also from films and screens. What are they doing while they're talking? We keep tagging it. I don't think we need to as much. Much as I had once upon a time pulled my feelings out of my hair and kicked them into the brewery wall. Such a great scene of the boy Pip. If I could have settled down and been but half as fond of the forge as I was when I was little, I know it would have been much better for me. You and I and Joe would have wanted for nothing then, and Joe and I would perhaps have gone partners when I was out of my time. And I might even have grown up to keep company with you. And we might have sat on this very bank on a fine Sunday, quite different people. I should have been good enough for you. Shouldn't I, Biddy? Oh my God, Pip, for real? And here's Biddy's lovely, lovely response. So, just to analyze, we know that Biddy likely has feelings for Pip. And here he is basically saying, I could have settled for you, but there's this, I'm tormented, I'm miserable within. And it's quite a cruel thing to say. And it is, luckily Pip has built a lot of credit with us. So instead of feeling angry at him for hurting Biddy, which would be natural, I feel more cringe, like, oh my god, why are you doing this? But Biddy can hold her own, thankfully. Biddy sighed as she looked at the ships sailing on and returned for answer, yes, I am not over particular. Good for you, Biddy. It scarcely sounded flattering, but I knew she meant well. Well, the exact same could be said for you, Pip. What you said to her was not at all flattering, though she hopefully knows you meant well. I do think men, myself included, need a lot of sort of affirmation from their partners sometimes. So I am guilty of that. Instead of that, said I, plucking up more grass and chewing a blade or two. See how I am going on, dissatisfied and uncomfortable, and what would it signify to me, being coarse and common, if nobody had told me so? Biddy turned her face suddenly towards mine and looked far more attentively at me than she had looked at the sailing ships. It was neither a very true nor a very polite thing to say, she remarked, directing her eyes to the ships again. Who said it? Now you're going to learn about your rival. I was disconcerted, for I had broken away without quite seeing where I was going to. I think we have that in conversations where you end up in a spot you weren't trying to get to. It was not to be shuffled off now, however, and I answered, the beautiful, so that's the first thing she hears, the beautiful young lady at Miss Havisham's. And she's more beautiful than anybody ever was. And I admire her dreadfully. And I want to be a gentleman on her account. So it all comes tumbling out. Having made this lunatic confession, I began to throw my torn up grass into the river, as if I had some thoughts of following it. Do you want to be a gentleman? To spite her or to gain her over? Biddy quietly asked me after a pause. Biddy is quite the tactician. She could have been a scholar tactician if anyone knows Old World. Actually, you can't. I think they're archetypes. I don't know, I moodily answered. Because if it is to spite her, Biddy pursued, I should think, but you know best. Again, this is a sort of a refrain. that might be better and more independently done by caring nothing for her words. Wow, Biddy is very wise, just like Joe. And if it is to gain her over, I should think, but you know best. So here it is a refrain, just like with Joe, but you know best. She was not worth gaining over. Because she's rude, Pip. But really, this is, I think this is brilliant because Biddy and Joe are such solid, wholesome, wise, intelligent people. But that doesn't make for good novels. It doesn't make for a good novel if you have characters like Joe and Biddy who are just steady eddies. Pip, while likable, yearns for something. He reaches for the stars. He's trying to take something that is theoretically beyond his grasp. And that's what makes a good novel, is someone pushing, trying, like Prometheus, trying to steal fire from the gods. So that's why, sometimes, if anything, like right there, chapter 17, I feel like I've learned something very, very valuable. So thank you, Charles Dickens. At this point, I feel like I can call him Chuck because we spent a lot of time together. Exactly what I myself have thought many times. Exactly what was perfectly manifest to me at the moment. But how could I? A poor, dazed village lad, avoid that wonderful inconsistency into which into which the best and wisest of men fall every day. So true, Pip. It may be all quite true, said I to Biddy, but I admire her dreadfully. That's how it works. In short, I turned over on my face when I came to that, and got a good grasp on the hair on each side of my head, and wrenched it well, all the while knowing the madness of my heart. To be so very mad and misplaced that I was quite conscious it would have served my face right if I had lifted it up by my hair and knocked it against the pebbles as a punishment for belonging to such an idiot. This is interesting because I think it's cathartic. Dickens is very reader aware, and he knows that the reader is going to be a little miffed at Pip for being so insensitive to Biddy, and especially because Pip previously has been very tactful and caring, especially with regard to Joe. So we're feeling a bit frustrated with Pip. So what does Dickens do? He gives us a moment of catharsis by physically punishing Pip. And the truth is, Pip is punishing himself for something else, right? Being an idiot for something else. But we get the catharsis for his mistreatment of Biddy. Biddy was the wisest of girls. Yeah, we know. And she tried to reason no more with me. She put her hand, which was a comfortable hand, roughened by work, poor Biddy, upon my hands, one after another and gently took them out of my hair. At this point, I'm sure most readers are Team Biddy. Then she softly patted my shoulder in a soothing way, while my face upon my sleeve, I cried a little. Oh, pathetic Pip. Exactly as I had done in the brewery yard, and felt vaguely convinced that I was very much ill-used by somebody or by everybody. I can't say which. I am glad of one thing, said Biddy, and that is that you have felt you could give me your confidence. That's very kind of Biddy to say, and I am glad of another thing, and that is that of course you know you may depend upon my keeping it, and always so far deserving it. If your first teacher, dear, such a poor one, and so much in need of being taught herself, had been your teacher at the present time, she thinks she knows what lesson she would set, but it would be a hard one to learn. And you have got beyond her, and it's of no use now. So, with a quiet sigh for me, Biddy rose from the bank and said, with a fresh and pleasant change of voice, "Shall we walk a little farther? Sometimes words just get so defamiliarized when you type them. Or go home." "Biddy," I cried, getting up, putting my arm around her neck and giving her a kiss. "I shall always tell you everything." That completes the friend zoning of Biddy. "Till you're a gentleman," said Biddy. "You know I never shall be. So that's always. Not that I have any occasion to tell you anything, for you know everything I know. As I told you at home the other night." "Ah," said Biddy, quite in a whisper, as she looked away at the ships, and then repeated with her former pleasant change. Just the number of positive verbs and adjectives around Biddy, if you made a word cloud, it just shows that characterization, it's an accumulated thing. It's a volume thing. "Shall we walk a little farther?" or go home. I said to Biddy we would walk a little farther. So he is indulgent, and so we end on that note that they're sort of in sync. And we did so, and the summer afternoon toned down into the summer evening, and it was very beautiful. I began to consider whether I was not more naturally and wholesomely situated, after all, in these circumstances, than playing beggar, my neighbor, by candlelight. In the room with the stopped clocks and being despised by Estella. I thought it would be very good for me if I could get her out of my head with all the rest of those remembrances and fancies, and could go to work, determined to relish what I had to do, and stick to it, and make the best of it. I asked myself the question whether I did not surely know that if Estella were beside me at that moment instead of Biddy, she would make me miserable. I was obliged, but she would electrify you, Pip. I was obliged to admit that I did know it for a certainty. And I said to myself, Pip, what a fool you are. So 17 chapters in, and I think we have seen successfully Dickens has dramatized a couple of questions here at this stage. He's dramatized, do you live a sort of complacent life, loving what is in front of you, not reaching beyond your grasp, choosing sort of wholesome, safe, versus putting yourself out there into the world. So that's one question he's successfully dramatized, and the way you know it's successfully dramatized is that it's not easy. Joe and Biddy are genuinely smart, interesting, thoughtful people. So it's not a fake dilemma, it's a real dilemma. Do you choose this sort of domestic bliss, but you've tasted the glamour and the excitement and the heart pounding adrenaline that comes from proximity to wealth and class and all those things that I'm sure many of us have experienced. So it's well dramatized. And the second is similar, like, do you choose a partner in life who makes you feel comfortable and at ease, like Biddy, or someone who electrifies you, like Estella? And that, as we know, is also a real dilemma, not one that is easily settled. So that's why I think Great Expectations, it's so good, because these are real dilemmas fully dramatized, and that's what novels are good for. Wow, so good. We talked a good deal as we walked, and all that Biddy said seemed right. Biddy was never insulting or capricious, or Biddy today and somebody else tomorrow. she would have derived only pain and no pleasure from giving me pain. She would far rather have wounded her own breast than mine. How could it be, then, that I did not like her much the better of the two? Great question, Pip. Biddy, said I, when we were walking homeward. I wish you could put me right. Now that's flirting. I wish I could. If I could only get myself to fall in love with you. You don't mind my speaking so openly to such an old acquaintance. I mean, this is really clumsy, Pip. This is really clumsy. Way to ruin a good walk. Oh dear, not at all, said Biddy. Don't mind me. She's really quite classy and funny. If I could only get myself to do it, that would be the thing for me. But you never will, you see. Wow, she's defeatist. She needs to reach for something. She needs to reach for the stars. But you never will, you see, said Biddy. That's sad. Sad line. Breaks my heart. It did not appear quite so unlikely to me that evening, as it would have done if we had discussed it a few hours before. I therefore observed I was not quite sure of that. But Biddy said she was. So she's sure that Pip can never love her. That's interesting. I'm excited to hear why she feels that way. And she said it decisively. In my heart, I believed her to be right, and yet I took it rather ill, too, that she should be so positive on the point. That's what I mean, that this is a very psychologically complex novel, because Pip has contradictory feelings and is aware of them. When we came near the churchyard, and so now also Dickens raises another enigma, which is, why is Biddy sure that Pip could never love her? We had to cross an embankment and get over a stile near a sluice gate. There started up from the gate, or from the rushes, or from the ooze, which was quite in his stagnant way, Old Orlick. He really appears out of nowhere, doesn't Old Orlick? Hello, he growled. Where are you two going? Where should we be going but home? Well then, said he, I'm jiggered if I don't see you at home. I was about to say I don't know what jiggered means, but it looks like Pip doesn't either. This penalty of being jiggered was a favorite supposition, a suppositious case of his. So a lot of thesaurus words here. He attached no definite meaning to the word that I am aware of, but used it like his own pretended Christian name to affront mankind and convey an idea of something savagely damaging. He does such a good job of characterizing Orlick as sort of willfully misanthropic. When I was younger, I had a general belief that if he had jiggered me personally, he would have done it with a sharp hook. Sharp and twisted, the extra adjective, hook. Biddy was much against his going with us, and said to me in a whisper, "Don't let him come. I don't like him," which surely he's aware of. As I did not like him either, I took the liberty of saying that we thanked him, but we didn't want seeing home. He received that piece of information with a yell of laughter and dropped back, but came slouching after us at a little distance. So very ominous, and it's still not clear to me that he has been completely cleared of the attack on Mrs. Joe. Curious to know whether Biddy suspected him of having had a hand in that murderous attack, of which my sister had never been able to give any account. I asked her why she did not like him. "Oh," she replied, glancing over her shoulder as he slouched after us, "because I am afraid he likes me." So this is all a circle, you know. Orlick likes Biddy. Well, not really a circle. I guess it's a line. Orlick likes Biddy. Biddy seems to like Pip. Pip likes Estella. For it to be a circle, Estella would need to get with Orlick. Did he ever tell you he liked you? I asked indignantly. It is somewhat comforting to know that this verb liked has been used to say I like someone in a romantic way since the 19th century. "No," said Biddy, glancing over her shoulder again. "He never told me so, but he dances at me whenever he can catch my eye." What does that mean, he dances at me? However novel and peculiar this testimony of attachment, I did not doubt the accuracy of the interpretation. I was very hot indeed upon old Orlick's daring to admire her, as hot as if it were an outrage to myself, because you, Pip, think of Biddy as your backup. But it makes no difference to you, you know, said Biddy calmly. No, Biddy, it makes no difference to me. Only I don't like it. I don't approve of it. Nor I neither, said Biddy, though that makes no difference to you. Exactly, said the obtuse Pip. But I must tell you, I should have no opinion of you, Biddy, if he danced at you with your own consent. So Pip remains a gentleman in some respects, even if he's really fumbled and put his foot in his mouth in this chapter. It occurs to me that Dickens really shows his range in this chapter. This could be a modern rom-com. Like, this chapter could be right out of 10 Things I Hate About You, or that, you know, Matthew McConaughey and Jennifer Lopez made in Manhattan. Was that Matthew McConaughey? It could be right out of a modern rom-com, this whole chapter. I kept an eye on Orlick after that night. So now we move out of scene and into summary. And whenever circumstances were favorable to his dancing at Biddy, got before him to obscure that demonstration, he had struck root in Joe's establishment by reason of my sister's sudden fancy for him. Or I should have tried to get him dismissed. So Pip is not beyond doing the underhanded. He quite understood and reciprocated my good intentions, as I had reason to know thereafter. So that's another enigma. And now, because my mind was not confused enough before, I complicated its confusion 50,000-fold by having states and seasons when I was clear that Biddy was immeasurably better than Estella. So that is somewhat satisfying for the reader, that Pip is conflicted, which is probably correct, rather than being obtuse and putting Estella on a pedestal and Biddy below. It's shifted at the end of this chapter, and I think that's always important to look for polarity changes in your characters. So at the beginning, yes, he put his foot in his mouth, etc. He said some dumb things, but at the end, he is genuinely conflicted, and I think that's the right place for him to be at this stage. And that the plain, honest working life to which I was born had nothing in it to be ashamed of, but offered me sufficient means of self-respect and happiness. At those times, I would decide conclusively that my disaffection to dear old Joe and the forge was gone, and that I was growing up in a fair way to be partners with Joe and to keep company with Biddy. Very sort of euphemistic or non-committal way of saying marrying Biddy, when all in a moment some confounding remembrance of the Havisham days would fall upon me like a destructive missile and scatter my wits again. Scattered wits take a long time picking up, and often before I had got them well together, that perhaps after all Miss Havisham was going to make my fortune when my time was out. If my time had run out, it would have left me still at the height of my perplexities. I dare say. It never did run out, however, but was brought to a premature end as I proceed to relate. So another enigma. Why did his apprenticeship come to a premature end? So we end on another enigma, on another cliffhanger, but this is just a blockbuster Hollywood chapter with really good rom-com dynamics. Biddy is very likable. You know, there's a Orlick is pursuing her, so there's all sorts of things going on. But most importantly is it's the dramatization of two ways of life embodied in Biddy and Estella, and one isn't self-evidently better than the other. And that is how you know it's a real dilemma and very, very well dramatized. And Pip is a young person trying to make decisions, and he's operating in sort of low agency conditions. He doesn't come from money. He isn't highborn. In fact, he's an orphan. So it's really exciting times. 230, page 230, and it's exciting times in this book. And thank you everyone for joining along. Please support the project if you are enjoying it, and also hope to see you at future chapters of this. And if you're watching in the future, I hope you enjoy. And see you Thursday. What a great hour and 15. I feel like I learned a ton. I hope you did as well.